and your wonderful shul. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we're very, very happy to have you. Just wanted to give a little background on you before you jump into the shir tonight. For people that don't,
it's not going to be a shir exactly, but whatever you say.
The talk.
Okay.
For those that don't know, I'm sure a lot of you do know, but Rabbi Buchwald is director of the National Jewish Outreach Program. He established that in 1987. He's done a lot of great work there, reaching out to Jews that aren't affiliated. He also runs some great programs through in JOP, like Shabbat Across America, Passover, Sukkot Across America. There are crash courses in Hebrew reading. He's also got Jewish tweets that go out for people that like the short format. And he also runs I think the famous beginner service at Lincoln Square Synagogue.
That's right.
It's a wonderful service. I can personally attest to that. I have a personal connection to Rabbi Buchwald because I went to his program in the beginner service years ago. He also officiated at our wedding. So it's really a
memorable wedding.
It was it was a great time. I had fun. So it was it's really a pleasure to have him. And Rabbi Buchwald is full of knowledge and little tidbits. I'll just share one thing that he told me years ago when I was first starting at the beginners program at Lincoln Square Synagogue. And he said, "Listen here, Jesse. You know what they say? The person that teaches someone Torah is like their father. So I'm your father." So I still heard that today, and it's true. If there was no Rabbi Buchwald, there would be no Yishai. So I know he's touched a lot of different people, and I'm sure a lot of people feel like that. And it's really a pleasure to have you here today, and looking forward to the topic, which will be the Baal Teshuva Movement, a revolution losing momentum. So Rabbi Buchwald, thank you, and looking forward to the talk.
Okay. First of all, I'm so proud of you, Jesse. The learning that you're doing, I understand that it's day and night, mamish day and night. I'm so, so proud of you. And the fact that you are so committed to Torah and your family's committed to Torah, it's such a beautiful thing. And I'm extraordinarily proud of you. Yirbu Kamocha Yisrael. May there be many like you in Israel.
Amen.
Okay, so normally the topic of this speech is Baal Teshuva Movement, a revolution gaining momentum. But lately, I felt that was not exactly true. And we're going to get to that, but most of this talk is going to be about the halcyon days of the Baal Teshuva Movement. And then we're going to get to where it is now. So I just want to explain to you, do any of you know what a soap opera is? I can't imagine that in your shul anybody knows what a soap opera is, because it's a television show, it's a serial about, So you've ever heard of Days of Our Lives? It's a pretty famous soap opera. I don't know if it's still running, but at one point, Days of Our Lives had an episode, a subplot, about a Jewish woman who was going out with a doctor, Days of Our Lives, and she was going out with a non-Jewish man, and the relationship broke up because he wouldn't convert. Now, how did that happen? That national television, Days of Our Lives, that's not like a typical story of Days of Our Lives. Usually, well, this is a love story, it's true. But this is certainly not a theme that would be part of Days of Our Lives. How did it happen? Because the chief writer of Days of Our Lives was a woman named Leah Lehman Toporoff. And you can actually look her up. She's a pretty famous writer. She's won a couple of Day Emmys. And because she was a graduate of Stern College. I think she was a Baal Teshuva, but graduate of Stern College. She inserted that. She was the head writer of Days of Our Lives. She inserted that as a theme. Also, going back to the 80s and 90s, there was a pilot on ABC TV called Mariah. Mariah was like Sing Sing. It was a major penitentiary prison, and it was about the chaplain at the prison. It was a woman who was a psychiatrist, an Orthodox Jewish psychiatrist, was one of the main characters there. And she confers with her father, who's a Rebbe in Flatbush, a Hasidic Rebbe in Flatbush. And she advises the prisoners, these violent prisoners, how to behave. How did that happen? Because the writer and the producer of Mariah was a man by the name of Alan Light. His name today is Asher Anshalite, who's a Baal Teshuva. He was the producer of Kate and Allie, which was a television program before that. It had won an Emmy as well. And the woman who was portraying the psychiatrist was a woman by the name of Tova Feldshuh, a Jewish, well-known Jewish actress, who happens to be, by the way, this is just a tidbit of information, the first cousin of Dale Gottlieb. Does anybody have an idea who Dale Gottlieb is? I don't hear you, anybody. Okay. Dale Gottlieb is Rabbi David Gottlieb of Or Sameach Yeshiva. Her first cousin is David Gottlieb, who was a very famous Rebbe, also a Baal Teshuva. He was the chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Johns Hopkins, who became a Baal Teshuva and then got smicha and moved to Israel and has been at Or Sameach for 40 years probably. And this was based on Alan Light's cousin, who was Rabbi Kozla, who really was the chaplain in Sing Sing. So it was very, very interesting. Then in 1987, one of the most pro-Jewish magazines, newspapers in the United States, I'm saying this in tongue-in-cheek, The Village Voice in 1987, ran a 3-inch banner headlines. A weekly newspaper came out with the banner headline, "Back to Shul, the return of New York's wandering Jews." Now, Village Voice is generally not sympathetic to traditional Judaism, but it actually did a survey of the shuls in Manhattan and telling how shuls were starting to fill up again. And then in 1995, it ran another article called "The Return of the New York Jew." Now, this is unbelievable that the Village Voice would write pro-Jewish articles. Absolutely unbelievable. Even though it was owned at one point, I think, by Leonard Stern, who is the son of Max Stern, who endowed Stern College. Hart's Mountain, if you remember. Then the Sunday Times New York, Sunday Times business section started writing full-page feature articles on new developments in kosher food. Major food companies have rediscovered the value of rabbinic certification in expanding sales. Wow, kashrus has become big, multi-billion-dollar business. And of course, you know, Mashiach can't be far away because the Oreo cookie became kosher with an OU. And not only that, but even the Tootsie Roll became kosher. What's happening in America? Mashiach is coming. The New York Times ran a supplement for many, many years called Elegant Jewish Living. Before Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, Pesach, there was a supplement to the Sunday magazine that was sponsored by Bloomingdale's, Lord & Taylor, and Saks, showing how beautiful Yom Tov could be by showing the most beautiful fashions, the most beautiful tableware, etc., etc. Going back a long time ago, this is 1985, there was actually a serial news magazine called 1985, sort of like 2020 or 60 Minutes. And it featured, this is on NBC, it featured the wedding of a Baal Teshuva and a Baal Teshuva, David and Vivian Relkin, which was an amazing thing. It had about a 20-minute section on the Baal Teshuva wedding. It interviewed the chassan, the kala, who came from non-religious backgrounds. They happened to be a very handsome couple and also from pretty high society. And they became frum. Their friends were there. They interviewed their friends. Their friends can't believe how these kids have freaked out. And they talk about mimosa, and they show how they lift up the chassan and kala, and how the kala is going to the mikveh and the chassan is going to the mikveh. It was unbelievable. This program, by the way, was produced by a friend of David Relkin, whose name is Todd Jacobs. Todd Jacobs was a businessman. He worked in finance. He had a sideline with Phil Burton to produce television shows. Today, he gave it all up. He got smicha, and he's the Rosh Yeshiva of Machon Yaakov in Israel. You've heard of Machon Shlomo? This is the sister school, Machon Yaakov. Now, PBS, public television, took this 20-minute segment and expanded it to an hour. They interviewed the chas and kala, how they got married and how they had children and how they moved to Muncie. It was unbelievable. And they used to show it around Pesach time every year. Now, you remember Nightline? I think it's still on television, the ABC News program. There was a very famous reporter by the name of Ted Koppel. And Ted Koppel, one instance, did a story about the Munkacher Rebbe's wedding. The Munkacher Rebbe rented out Nassau Coliseum, had 5,000 guests, and all the Hasidim were there, and he did a story on the Munkacher Rebbe's wedding, and it was narrated by Chaim Potok, the famous author. And instead of being ridiculing, it was very, very positive. Mashiach Satan, something's going wrong. What's happening here? Everybody's discovering Judaism. Everybody's discovering Jewishness. Usually the media is very much against traditional Jews. Eyewitness News, Channel 7, called up Lincoln Square. And they said, we want to do a story on the Jewish return on the Upper West Side. Jewish return on the Upper West Side. So I said, why are you doing a story on the Jewish return on the Upper West Side? And they said, well, it's sweeps week. You know, it's sweeps week, and they take the Nielsen ratings and they decide, you know, they want to get higher advertising rates. So I couldn't understand. I said, you think that doing a story on the Baal Teshuva movement on the Upper West Side is going to bring in more viewers, that you're going to be able to raise your prices for advertising? And they said, yes, that's what our executives think. So I figured maybe, you know, ABC News is on the Upper West Side on 64th Street, 65th Street, 66th Street, something like that. I said, where are these executives who made this decision? Maybe they see the crowds outside Lincoln Square Synagogue. And they said, no, they're in the Loop in Chicago. So the executives in the Loop in Chicago thought that this was going to be a sexy story that was going to raise their ratings. And you'll see actually what happened, how that happened. Then there are television programs that always include Orthodox Jewish characters. It's like unbelievable. There was the Trials of Rosie O'Neill that had a Jewish policeman. Bill Cosby had a story about a Jewish boy who didn't want to play football on Shabbos. Of course, there's Schindler's List and Steven Spielberg. Now, you know, that Kirk Douglas, Olav Shalom, he discovered his Jewishness in his late years. Goldie Hawn is seen at the Kotel, kissing the Kotel. Laurie Singer, who started in Footloose, she actually came to the beginner's service. You have a guy by the name of David Sachs, who's a Baal Teshuva from the Upper West Side, who's won a couple of Emmys. He is a writer for The Simpsons, and he wrote The Third Rock from the Sun. Very, very, very popular programs. Peter Jennings went to Jerusalem. Turns out that he has a stepson or a stepdaughter learning Torah in Jerusalem. It's like unbelievable. Then we had this guy, Peter Howard. Peter Howard is known as Mr. Broadway. Peter Howard, when he was about 72 years old, he shows up at the beginner's service at Lincoln Square Synagogue. He already was ill at that time. He had Parkinson's, and he sat down in the front row of the beginner's service, and he fell asleep. He wasn't well. And then at the end of the service, he says, could I come back next week? And I said, sure, please come back. I said, what's your name? And he says, my name is Peter Howard, but you call me Chuna. Don't call me Peter. Don't call me Peter. I didn't know who he was. The next week, we had an extensive kiddush with Cholent in the next room. And some woman comes up to me and she says, who is that man? I say, his name is Peter Howard, but he likes to be called Chuna. She runs over to him and she comes back hysterical. She says to me, Rabbi, do you know who that man is? That's Peter Howard. He's Mr. Broadway. He's the most famous orchestrator, musical director, and choreographer on Broadway. I've been dancing to his music. She was a Baal Teshuva Rockette. She's a Baal Teshuva Rockette, one of 3 Orthodox Jewish Rockettes that I know of. One was a convert, an Asian convert. Unbelievable. And then, you know, he was at the beginner's service, and a woman was at the beginner's service, an Asian woman who happens to be a world famous violist. And she sees Peter Howard there and she says, that's Peter Howard. I did a record with him about New York. And then a fellow by the name of Eddie Jacobs, he was an actor on Broadway. He comes to visit. Turns out that he's Rabbi Riskin's son-in-law who became a Baal Teshuva. And he says, that's Peter Howard. He was the only one who supported me when I was on Broadway. Like, unbelievable. The man orchestrated Chorus Line, 42nd Street. He did Spielberg movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he started coming to Minyan every day, even though he wasn't well. And he made his home kosher, put up mezuzahs. It was so beautiful. So traditional Judaism has turned a corner over the last 30, 40 years. We're no longer looked upon as primitive, medieval, and an impossible option. And I'll try to portray to you how that came to be. Now, if you want to talk about the Baal Teshuva movement, I guess the first Baal Teshuva was Yehuda, the son of Jacob. You've heard of him? Judah, the son of Jacob, where he impregnated Tamar, his daughter-in-law, and she challenges him, whoever owns these signs, he was the man who impregnated me, and he could have stonewalled, he could have just thrown the evidence out. And he says, instead, she is more righteous than I am. He became the first Baal Teshuva. And it's no surprise that we're called Yehudim because of him, because of Judah, because Teshuva is such an essential part of Judaism. But then you go on, there were famous Baal Teshuva, there were famous Gerim, converts to Judaism. Remember that Akiva was from a convert, from Meir was from Shmaya and Avtalion were converts, Onkelos was a convert. So you have these famous converts, but we're talking about Baal Teshuva, about Jews who returned to the fold after they had left. We're unbelievable darling of the media, at least we were for a certain time. And we've never had such positive coverage. Italian TV, German TV, everybody called. They wanted to know about the Baal Teshuva movement. They really wanted to know about the Baal Teshuva movement. And it also happened in the very, very important media. This is very important to understand. Obviously, you know, the Lubavitcher Rebbe did outreach, and Yeshiva University was actually in the forefront of the Baal Teshuva movement with its Torah Leadership Seminar. This is talking with Dr. Abe Stern in the mid-60s, early 60s, was called Torah Leadership Seminar. That evolved into NCSY. And many, many, many people came through that system. And of course, there was the JSS program at Yeshiva University run by Rabbi Besdin. And you have many rabbis today, distinguished older rabbis, who became Baal Teshuva through that program. That's where Rabbi Riskin cut his teeth. Rabbi Blech cut his teeth there. They were the teachers there. It was an amazing, amazing program. But what happened in terms of the identity, the mindset of American Jews. Remember, Orthodox Jews were considered like outcasts. They were the poorest of the denominations. They didn't have the glorious shuls that the conservatives and reform built because they invested all their money into day schools, which was the key factor that gave life to the Orthodox Jewish community. We're talking about the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, where instead of building these beautiful temples, they built day schools. That made a big, big difference. They invested all their eggs in one basket. And Orthodoxy was considered sort of like outcasts. They would never amount to anything. In fact, you know that Life magazine wrote an article, I think it was Life magazine, they wrote an article about the end of the Jews, you know, and by the end of 2000, Life had disappeared and Orthodox Jews were doing very, very well. But I want to go back a little further. There was a magazine article in Rolling Stone magazine in San Francisco. Rolling Stone magazine, this goes back to 1977. And it was written by a woman by the name of Ellen Willis. Ellen Willis is a famous, very famous feminist writer. She had a brother whose name was Mike Willis, who went to Eretz Yisrael and wound up with Noah Weinberg. Now, Mike Willis was a star. And instead, he left everything, just like his sister was a star, and he left everything and went to study to be a rabbi in Aish Torah, or one of the previous yeshivas from Rabbi Noach Weinberg. And she did a full-length story. It must have been 30 or 40 pages. If you get your hands on it, it's probably on Google. It's called Journey to Jerusalem, April 21st, 1977, in Rolling Stone magazine. Ellen Willis. And she talks about the challenges that he had in yeshiva, changing his lifestyle, what it meant for the family, what it meant to her. She at one point even considered signing up to the girls' school, but then she made the decision not to, and she did not become. Now, Chaim Willis is a pretty famous rabbi today. Then, and this I think was probably the coup de grace. This was the most important and most influential of all the news articles that was ever written. And September 30th, 1984, some of you probably weren't even alive then, the Sunday Times magazine featured an article called American Jews Rediscover Orthodoxy, September 30th, 1984. I don't know how many of you have ever seen that article. It's worth looking at. Why is that so important? And who wrote that article? That article was written by a woman by the name of Natalie Gittleson, who was a very, very famous editor of magazines. She was on the editorial staff of the New York Times magazine. She was a very good friend of Betty Friedan, Betty Friedan through her. We had many discussions about feminism and the mechitza and everything. But she had two children. One, a Harvard-educated young man, Tony Gittleson, who started coming to the beginner service. Tony Gittleson is a producer in Hollywood. He did the Muppets Take Manhattan or something like that. He's done some very successful work. And he started coming, and his daughter Eve started coming to the beginner service, and they made their homes kosher. And Natalie Gittleson can't understand how did these happen. She sent them to the best schools. She sent them to the Fieldston School, to Harvard. How did they get involved in this cult of orthodoxy? And she started coming to the beginner service, and she met all these intriguing people, including Alan Light, the producer Kate Nally, and Peter Howard wasn't there yet. Anyway, she couldn't understand it. She meets all these very intriguing people, and she says, I'm going to write a story about this. And she writes this story called American Jews Rediscover Orthodoxy. Now, the title is not true. American Jews did not rediscover Orthodoxy. A couple of them, a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand of them rediscovered Orthodoxy. But this article changed the mind, the attitude, the mind fix of many, many American Jews. Why? Because for the first time, a news article featured American Jews who had made it to the highest pinnacle of American life in business and in theater and in art and in academia, and became Orthodox. It featured Zalman Bernstein, the famous billionaire, Arnio Penzis, the Nobel Prize winning, Alan Light, the producer of Kate Nally. And it showed that for the first time you could be successful as a Jew in America and not give up your Jewish identity. Because until then, anybody who wanted to be successful usually converted out or gave up their Judaism. And that changed the mind fix of the people. And American Jews thought that American Jews were rediscovering Judaism. Then New York Magazine had a front page story. Actually, they had two front page stories, but on November 17th, 1986, the return to tradition on the Upper West Side. And it featured, by the way, I even have copies of these magazine articles, okay? Here's American Jews Rediscover Orthodoxy. I don't know if you can see it, but there it is. You see, there is Zalman Bernstein with his bowler cap and his tallis on his Central Park South veranda davening. And under him is the Nobel Prize winning from Bell Laboratories, who discovered the transistor, Arnio Penzis. Then this was, I said, 1986, New York magazine called The New Orthodox, the Jewish Revival on the Upper West Side. And it featured investment banker David Eisner and his wife, Karen Eisner, Lehman Eisner. And she was a filmmaker. He was a banker. David Eisner today is the Assistant Secretary to the Treasury in Washington, D.C. And it told about, how they evolved. Well, Karen came from a religious community. She grew up in an Orthodox home, but David came from a conservative, non-Orthodox home. And it featured all the stories, a lot of stories about people on the Upper West Side. Now, if we were to summarize this, we would have to summarize this sort of like what happened in Egypt. You know that the angel of death came in the last plague and killed all the firstborn. And the Torah there uses the phrase, Ein bayis asher ein sham met, or Saradit, Ein bayit asher ein sham met. There is no home where one was not dead. In other words, every single Egyptian home was stricken. They said because their wives cheated on their sons and they had a lot of firstborn, and there was always a dead person there. Today, we can summarize this, paraphrase this, and say, Ein bayit asher ein sham met. There is almost no Jewish home, or at least there wasn't until recently, a Jewish home that didn't have chai, someone who came alive, a Jew who had wandered away, strayed away from tradition. We all come from traditional homes. All of us, every single one of us, comes from traditional homes 3, 4, 5, 6 generations ago, and has come back. So we're talking about the wealthiest, most influential families in America have Baal Teshuva, or sympathetic to tradition. Val Diker from the Tishman family, Zalman Bernstein, the Pritzker family, the Milstein family, the Belsberg family, the Wexner family. Bronfman is learning Talmud. And even Steinhardt, the atheist, he has a daughter with 6 children who are going to Ramaz Yeshiva. Can you imagine? Unbelievable. Michael Steinhardt, the atheist, he says all of it. I wish there were more atheists. Like, he has changed the pattern of Jewish life because of his commitment to Judaism. It's unbelievable. The intelligentsia. This is what I was trying to emphasize before when I spoke about the Chaim Willis, okay, about Ellen Willis, how the influential people, the writers, the intelligentsia, were impacted by this, the opinion makers, Natalie Gittleson, Betty Friedan, Joseph Papp, the impresario. Everybody thought that he was an Italian guy. Suddenly he puts on a production in Yiddish. Norman Mailer, Deborah Wenger, Andre Gregory. That's interesting. There's a classic movie called My Dinner with Andre. And it is a very, very famous movie, not only because it's a great movie, My Dinner with Andre. It's a dialogue between Andre and his friend, but also because Andre Gregory was a very influential person in Hollywood who discovered, let's say, Dustin Hoffman, and he brought all these stars up. Andre Gregory, until he was 40 years old, thought that he was Russian Orthodox. He was raised to believe that he was Russian Orthodox. At 40 years old, he discovered that his mother and father were both Jewish. And he started coming to the beginner service, Andre Gregory, and he started studying. He had a non-Jewish wife. Her name was Mercedes. She was a very famous artist and dancer. When she died pretty young. He eulogized her with a yarmulke on his head because she encouraged him to find his Judaism. He's remarried now to a Jewish wife. The impact on the literary world, for instance, New Yorker magazine had 2 full editions based on Liz Harris's Holy Days book, where she describes what Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is like in Crown Heights. Liz Harris, Holy Days. Paul Cowan, the very famous author from The Village Voice, wrote a book, all of a sudden, An Orphan in History. And you know that his wife converted non-Orthodox and she became a rabbi. Paul Cowan, the late lamented writer. Anne Roife, who was very, very indifferent about her Judaism. In fact, she wrote an article in the New York Times about how wonderful Christmas was. I think her daughter is now a pretty famous writer as well. Anne Royfi wrote this article about how wonderful Christmas is and how stupid the Jewish traditions are. Well, she got feedback you can't imagine. She said, well, let me explore a little bit. And she explored her Judaism, and she wrote Generation Without a Memory, how Jews grow up without the Jewish memory. There are very famous writers today, Baal Teshuva writers, who are unbelievably successful. Random House published the Steinsaltz Talmud in English. Now it's coming out again with Koren, but it was originally published by Random House. It's like unbelievable. Britney Spears is wearing a red bendel. Britney Spears is wearing a red bendel. And Madonna is studying Kabbalah. Madonna is studying. Now, let me tell you something about Madonna that you probably don't know. And that is, Madonna keeps Shabbos. Madonna keeps a traditional Shabbos. She refuses to work on Shabbos. You know that they had the Eurovision contest about 2-3 years ago. And the Shalva youth group band, you know, these disabled children, they won the Eurovision contest in Israel. And they were supposed to be represented in the Eurovision contest. But Eurovision insisted, because the year before Israel had won it, so the Eurovision contest took place in Israel. Eurovision insisted that the rehearsal would take place on Shabbos and the contest would be on Sunday. And the Shalva band said, no, we will not perform on Shabbos. Unbelievable what they did. At the last minute, they invited Madonna to come to sing at the Sunday performance. But they said, you have to rehearse on Shabbos. And Madonna said, no. Lo, with an absolutely not. And for her, they broke the rules. Madonna has been the greatest proponent of Shabbos in our age, more than any rabbi outreach worker. It's like unbelievable what's going on in this world. What I'm saying is, this is a Meshuggah event. It's a crazy, crazy world. The Baal Teshuva show us what commitment is. And I've had a number, we've had about, I don't know, 12 to 15,000 people come through the beginner service over the last 47 years. Yes, 44 years, excuse me. I've been a beginner's rabbi for 44 years. I'm trying to become a real rabbi one of these days, maybe, okay? And over the last 44 years, so the way we figure this out is the number of guests that we've had in our house. We think around 15,000 people have come to my house from the beginner service. That's a tribute to my wife, okay? And among them was a fellow by the name of Jim Patesky. Today his name is Yaakov Patesky. And he was a vice president at J.P. Morgan. Remember J.P. Morgan, the bank, which became J.P. Morgan Chase, okay? And he asked for a leave of absence. He spoke Spanish, so he was in charge of all the banking for South America. And he asked his boss for a leave of absence so he can go study. And he went to study in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. And they gave him a leave of absence. They'd never give. J.P. Morgan was not so friendly to Jews. They never gave it. And they say, you'll come back, you'll give you the job. And he came back and he asked for a second year, and they gave him a second. The third year, he asked his boss to come with him to the yeshiva. But eventually, he went back into banking. But that was the commitment that he made. Some of you may be familiar with Tom Steinberg, who was a vice president at Goldman Sachs, a graduate of Yale and Stanford. But Tom Steinberg actually ran the Tisch family portfolio, and he became very, very famous, moved to Israel, and he runs Ma'or, which is an outreach group, after he retired from the Tisch family. Interesting story is a woman by the name of Pat Popek. Pat Popek doesn't sound like a Jewish name. In fact, she is Jewish, and her father was a pit boss in Las Vegas. Her father and brother were pit bosses. I think her brother still is. Her father's deceased. I didn't know what a pit boss is, but he was the one who runs the tables, the blackjacks, the spinning wheels there. And she decided that she was going to be Shomer Shabbos. She had a very, very good job. she became the national sales director of Anne Klein too. Now, Anne Klein is owned by a man, a Japanese businessman by the name of Mr. Taki, T-A-K-I, who owns a lot of clothing lines, very famous clothing lines. And at that point, he opened up what's called Anne Klein too. And she became the national sales director and built it up to $500 million of sales a year. That's just 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And she says to Mr. Taki, I can't work on Shabbos. And he says, okay. She comes to me and she says, I have to go out to dinner with these people. What can I eat? I show her what she can eat. And then finally, after she becomes Shomer Shabbos, she says, Rabbi, I have to go study in Israel. This is Pat Papa. She was probably in her late 20s. And she asked Mr. Taki, can I take 6 months off to go study in Israel? And he says, you've been so great, I can't say no. Okay, and we'll save your job, but you have to promise me that you're going to come back in 6 months. After 5 months, she sends him a telegram. We didn't have email then. And she says, Mr. Taki, I need to stay for 6 more months. And Mr. Taki said, I am coming to get you. And he took a private plane. He landed at Ben Gurion Airport, and he was met by Pat Popik and Rabbi Revson, the head of Neve. He sat in on the girls' classes, and he said, you can stay another 6 months. And she came back. She got a higher job, but she was really unhappy. Eventually, she moved to Jerusalem and became married there and has a frum family. Interesting, to this day on East 28th Street and a loft on East 28th Street, there is a group of musical directors from Broadway and from television, from Saturday Night Live. And it's a group who get together every week to study the Parsha with a musical director from Saturday Night Live. His name is Phil Namenworth, And it's unbelievable. I've gone there, actually. There were like 3 or 4, if you want your child to become frum, ask them to become a music director in Saturday Night Live. 3 or 4 of them have become frum. Together, you'll see all these young rock stars who are coming out, emerging, who come to this loft on East 28th Street and study Torah. Kenny Vance from Jay and the American, the John White's son, Bo. One of the prominent members was Peter Himmelman. Anybody know who Peter Himmelman is? Does anybody know who Peter Himmelman is? Come on, you got to show your American knowledge, Jewish American knowledge. Peter Himmelman. Is everybody muted? I hope not. Peter Himmelman is the son-in-law of Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan. You know who Bob Dylan is? Okay? 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 So Peter Himmelman, also from Minnesota, is a rock star today. Who's from? He's from. Because his wife went to a day school in Long Beach, California. When Bob Dylan lived in California, he sent his kids to a Chabad school. Do you believe it? Jacob Dylan also went there. Jacob Dylan, that's Bob's son. And Peter Himmelman is a rock star who put out his first album, I think was called Gematria. He came to the beginner's service, and I asked him what his name was. I didn't recognize him. And he says, Pesach ben Moshe. Can you imagine a rock star in America identifying himself as Pesach ben Moshe? The founder of the Lincoln Square Beginner Service is a man by the name of Steve Reich. Steve Reich, Ze'ev Reich. If you look up Steve Reich in Wikipedia, you'll see that he's one of the world's most famous composers, okay, of modern music, okay? He is the father of, he's a percussion composer and the father of minimalistic music. He has won the equivalent of 2 Nobel Prizes in music. He's won one from the Swedish government and also the Imperial Prize from Japan. He's won a Pulitzer Prize for music. He's a little over 80 years old, but he came to my class, Chumash. This was back in 1973, 1974 with his girlfriend, Beryl. And he was always flying around. I didn't know who he was, said he was a musician. And he would go to Germany because he used to record for Deutsche Grammophon. And he would send me notes. This is what I did. I'm studying the parsha. And he would write exactly what he was studying. Come back, he'd review it with me. And Rabbi Riskin, at that point, you know, Lincoln Square was very successful. They built a new shul in 1970. It was overcrowded the day that they walked in. And there were issues with overcrowding. And he said, Ephraim, he says, would you run an overflow minyan? I said, I'm not interested. But when Steve Reich suggested that I run a beginner service, I jumped at it. And in 1975, December 1975, we started the beginner service. It was him, me, his girlfriend, now wife, another man, an accountant by the name of Steve Reich. And every other week, some crazy guy came in on roller skates with a tennis racket and say, how do you know that there's a God? How is that going to succeed? How is a beginner service going to come? First of all, the name is pejorative, you know, a beginner. People don't want to be identified as beginners. Some call it a learning service, which is nice. We called it a beginner service. And upstairs in the main sanctuary was Sherwood Goffin, Oliver Shalom, and Stephen Riskin, Stevie Wonder. And he was packing Time magazine, called him Stevie Wonder. Who would come to beginner service? And slowly people started to come. And then we moved from the big cavernous ballroom into a little room on the second floor, where it lasted for about 35 years. And people started coming. The New York Times got wind of it, and they did a feature story on it, and it was standing room only. Standing room only. Interesting, the photographer who took that picture, in 82, it was a front page story in the second section of the Times on Shabbos. That was like the best position you could possibly get. Her name is Sarah Krolwich. She just won a Pulitzer Prize for photography for the theater. Her son, 5 years ago, showed up at the beginner service. Her son, he's now learning in Eretz Yisrael, in Kol Yaakov Yeshiva. Unbelievable guy, graduate of Princeton. She is not happy. She is not happy. It's a new environment. It's not triumphalism. Oh, yes, I just want to mention also, before I do go, I want to talk about that guy, Eddie Jacobs, that I mentioned. Eddie Jacobs was a Broadway actor, Broadway show Barnum, and together with two other Broadway actors from Barnum, they used to come before the matinee on Shabbos to the beginner service. And then they'd run out and play on Broadway in the matinee on Shabbos. Eventually, he went to Israel, studied in yeshiva, and he married Rabbi Riskin's daughter. That's Eddie Jacobs. He today is a pretty famous architect. He was the architect of the Hampton Synagogue, Rabbi Schneier's synagogue. Very famous architect. Anyway, it's a new environment, not triumphalism, but a deep, abiding concern that no Jew needs to opt out of Judaism and Jewish life out of ignorance because they never had an opportunity to learn. Why are Jews not involved? Why are Jews not connected? Ambassador Friedman, I just saw an article that he says, though what's happening to American Jews is that they're dying out of ignorance. They're dying out of ignorance. It's not that they're disenchanted with Judaism. They've never had a positive connection. They've never had positive, joyous Jewish experiences. And that's why we're losing them. That's why we lost them. And we had the opportunity, anyone who sustains a single life in Israel, it's as if sustain a whole world. Instead of sending out the ocean liner, we've been sending out a rowboat. We haven't really done a job. There are thousands and thousands of kiruv workers, but there are very, very, very few Baal Teshuva. I think at the height, probably in the 80s, there might have been 4,000 Baal Teshuva a year, which was a remarkable number. But given the fact that there are about 4,000 or 5,000 outreach workers, and they should at least make one for each person, right? If they were selling refrigerators, if they didn't sell 5,000 refrigerators, they'd be fired 10 times over. What happened? Well, what's happened, and here's where the Baal Teshuva revolution has run out of steam. The great tragedy of America is the collapse of the conservative and reform movements. The great tragedy in kiruv in America is the collapse of the reform and conservative movement. Every kid in the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s had a bar mitzvah. Every kid went to Hebrew school, 70, 80% of Jewish kids. But now they don't. Their parents don't belong to a synagogue. They don't give them a bar mitzvah. They never learned Hebrew. They never saw Shabbos. They have no connection to Judaism. And that's why they don't respond like the old timers did. When you invited them for a Shabbos meal, they were happy to come. To learn Hebrew, they were happy to come. Basic Judaism, happy to come. Jewish history, happy to come. A beginner's service, they were happy to come. They were intrigued. They were interested because they had a connection to Judaism when they were bar mitzvah, even though they walked out. You know, I've often said if the Jews for Jesus was smart, they paid to send every Jewish kid to an afternoon Hebrew school because it proved to be the greatest turn off the Jewish life. Not a joke. But at least they had a connection. And now you have no connection. The collapse of the conservative and reform movement, which was the feeder to the Baal Teshuva movement. Very, very, very sad. And you don't have any connection whatsoever. Just to tell you an entertaining story, one of the people who came to the beginner series was this guy, a comedian you might know. His name is Mark Weiner. Mark Weiner, Moshe Weiner. Okay? Mark Weiner tells the story of how he came to Lincoln Square Synagogue. He said he grew up in a Reform temple in Westchester. And what he said is a lip sync bar mitzvah. They played a record. He moved his lips, and the record played the Haftorah. That was his bar mitzvah. Can you imagine? And he said he came into New York. He's wearing jeans and a T-shirt, sneakers, you know, dressed like a Friday night guy. He was a comedian. He was on Saturday Night Live, pretty famous on the college campuses. He was very, very successful. And it was 90 degrees and 100% humidity. And he was sweating bullets. And he sees this relatively new modern building, Lincoln Square Synagogue. That's the old Lincoln Square Synagogue. He says, oh, Friday night, synagogue, must be open, must be air conditioned. I'll go in. I'll go in. He comes into Lincoln Square Synagogue on Friday night. Jeans, T-shirt, sneakers, and he opens the door. You remember the old Lincoln Square Synagogue, even the new Lincoln Square Synagogue. It's not designed exactly the same way, but the old Lincoln Square Synagogue, the entrance was right in the middle between the men and the women's section. Once you walked through the doors, everybody saw you. It was a circle. Everybody saw you. They were exactly at the point on Friday night in the Chadodi of the last paragraph where they go, Boi Chala, and they turn the door and bow down as Mark Weiner walks into the shul. And he says, wow, what a warm welcome. I don't believe this. They're all bowing down to me. He comes down to the seat and he sits next to some guy and he grabs a sitter and the guy says to him, you must be new here. He says, how do you know? He says, well, you're holding the sitter upside down. He shows him the pages and he's nice to him. He talks to him. And at the end of the service, he says to Mark Weiner, he says, would you like to come home with me for a Shabbos meal? So Weiner is a little suspicious. He says, maybe some guy is trying to pick him up, you know, the West Side. And he says, no. He says, no, it's not just me. There'll be other people there. There'll be men, women. We'll have a great time. Come to my house. I have great food. So they go outside, and he says to the guy, where do you live? He says, I live 20 blocks north. 20 blocks north. Okay? 89th Street. So Weiner goes into the street, and he hails the cab. And the guy says to him, oh, no, we can't hail a cab. We have to walk. He says, listen, I just went in to cool off. We'll walk slowly. They come to the guy's building on 89th Street, and the guy lives on the 19th floor of a high-rise building. So Weiner walks into the elevator. He says, the guy says to him, oh, no, we can't take an elevator. He says, listen, you got me to walk 20 blocks now in the heat. I'm not climbing up 19 floors. I'm not. Forget it. Goodbye. So the guy says to him, okay, this is what we'll do. We'll stand in the elevator. You have to promise me that you won't push any buttons. Hold your hands at the side. And if someone comes in and pushes, let's say 20, we'll walk down one floor. 18, we'll walk up one floor. Guy comes in, a woman comes in first, and she looks and she sees these two men standing with their hands at their side. They say, "Where are you going?" And they say, "Wherever you're going, ma'am." And she starts screaming, "Help, police." Then a man comes in with a bucket full of laundry, and he presses basement. He didn't even live in the building. He was doing the laundry in the machines. They waited through 2 wash cycles and a drying cycle. The guy came back. Finally, they traipsed up 19 floors, and Weena is fit to be tied. He is so upset. He comes in and he sees something that he's never seen before. He sees everybody holding a glass, a cup of wine. And he says, "Oh, I'd like to make a toast to the host." And they say to him, "Shh, this is Kiddush." He doesn't know what Kiddush is. He doesn't know what Kiddush is. Then they make a big announcement. They say, "It's time to wash." Time to wash. He's never heard that expression before. He smells his underarms and he says, "Do I really smell so badly?" No, they say, "No, it's ritual washing. Go into the kitchen. You'll stand online. I'll tell you what to do." He's standing online and he notices that everybody has a ring. They put it in their mouth before they wash. So he turns to the woman behind him and he says, "Ma'am, could I borrow your bracelet because I don't have any jewelry to put into my mouth?" It goes on and on and on. It is absolutely hysterical about what it is, the initiation of a Jew, of a non-religious Jew, a Jew who hasn't had the opportunity to be exposed to the positive and joyous Jewish life goes through. He has some beautiful videos on YouTube. Mark Weena, check it out. It's absolutely brilliant. The assimilation statistics, what can I tell you about assimilation statistics? Today, non-Orthodox world, 70% intermarriage, 70% intermarriage. There's a third of Jews, actually it's not that many, less than a third of the Jews are Orthodox in America. It's only 10% of the Jews in America that are Orthodox. There's a third of the Jews who are identified and belong to the synagogue. That includes the 10% of Orthodox. There's 10% that do identify as Jews, and there are 10% who no longer identify as Jews. There are 750,000 Jewish children who are being raised in non-Jewish tradition, 750,000. It's unbelievable. You know that they have a memorial in Yad Vashem for 1.5 million children who were killed. And here we've lost 750,000. It's unbelievable. Now, these statistics that we're talking about, the attrition of the American Jewish community, takes into consideration, remember that, who knows, 200,000 Russian Jews came to the United States. 400,000 Israeli Jews live in the United States. The birth rate is so low that it's not replacing except for the Orthodox. Only the Orthodox are replacing. Only the Orthodox are growing. And they're not growing that much. You know why? Got news for you. And this is part of my message. My life mission has been reaching out to the non-Orthodox. My life mission has been reaching out. But I have always said that the #1 priority in Jewish life is to keep the committed committed. Keep the committed committed. Let me tell you something. We have a very, very serious problem. Not only do we have the meltdown of the conservative and reform movement, but we also have a meltdown in our community. About 40% of non-Orthodox kids are leaving the fold. 40%, about 40%. They go to secular college, it's probably even higher. There was a study recently done on Chabad on campus. Now, who's more committed to the kids on campus than Chabad? Unbelievable. They did a study that showed that modern Orthodox kids from non-Orthodox homes, non-Orthodox yeshivas, who attended Chabad during their 4 years of college on a regular basis, every single Shabbos, 40% were no longer Orthodox 3 years after they graduated. 40% of kids who attended Chabad. Remember the myriads who did not attend, never even went to Chabad, who were turned off even before. These were the kids who came on a regular basis for 4 years. And let me tell you, in the Haredi community, it is not much better. Not much better. I believe that there are 35 outreach programs in Lakewood alone for kids who've gone off the derech. Unbelievable what's happening there. It's happening in Crown Heights. It's happening on the Upper West Side. People from the best families. It's such an incredible tragedy. That's the #1 priority in Jewish life, to keep the committed. And maybe in the question and answer part, we could talk about strategies about that. I think it's important for the non-Orthodox community to do hospitality for people who are not religious, to reach out to people who are in their office. Of course, this is after the coronavirus and we get the vaccine. We can't invite guests at this point. But we need to mobilize the Orthodox community to become ambassadors. I didn't say that you have to be evangelists, but ambassadors. Okay, you don't have to be trying to convert people, but be ambassadors. Invite them to your home. For the price of a chicken, you can make a Baal Teshuva. It's true. For the price of a chicken, you can make a Baal Teshuva. You invite a non-religious Jew to your home, you can make a Baal Teshuva. And if you have 4 guests once a month on Shabbos, we can mobilize the committed community. One of the most effective ways of keeping the committed is by having non-religious people at your table. Sometimes they introduce topics that you don't want them to introduce. But really what you have to do then, you can't talk Lashon Hara, and you have to talk Torah, and you have to sing Zmiras. You have to make believe that you're really having a Shabbos because you want to influence them. So it has a meritorious effect on your life as well. In fact, one of the greatest speeches that was ever given on the Baal Teshuva movement was given at the 10th anniversary of the beginner service. And that was in February 22nd, 1986, and was given by a man by the name of Hilly Gross. Some of you may have seen this because it's gotten like 1 million views. If you go to the NJOP website, you can actually see the speech. The quality of the video is not that great, but it was an amazing speech. And Alan Light, who was the producer, Kate Nally, was the MC, and he wanted Hilly Gross to say something at the 10th anniversary of the beginner service because they had hosted him for many years, he and his wife, who was an actress in the Woody Allen films, Renee Lippen. And so they asked him to respond to the celebration of the 10th anniversary. And this is what he said, okay? I hope I can read this clearly. This is Hilly Gross speaking to 500-600 graduates of the beginner service in Martin Luther King Junior High School auditorium on the Upper West Side. And he says as follows: I am here tonight on what I fear is a totally vain effort to restore some perspective to this orgy of self-congratulations that you have staged for yourselves this evening. So he's making fun of the beginners, right? And he says, because I think that somehow it's important that you beginners, BTs, leave tonight with at least a sense of how we, the FFBs, as you call us, the from births, the lifers, quote unquote, lifers, day by day, Lincoln Square, everyday congregants feel about you. And then he looks at the audience and he says, we don't like you. We don't like you. And if you'll just indulge me for 2 or 3 minutes, I will tell you why it is that we don't like you. Aside from the fact that you refuse to talk to us during davening. Our shoes are closed now. No one's talking. For 10 years now, you have been coming to my house on Shabbosim and Yom Tovim, just this once to try to see it from my perspective. I am what sociologists and demographic experts would call, quote, the tired Jewish businessman, close quote. My fantasy of the ideal Friday night is to daven as fast as I can, eat as fast as I can, jump under the covers, assume a pre-fiddle position, and conk out until Shabbos. So I come to shul Friday night, and invariably Rabbi Buchwald approaches and says, would I mind taking 3 or 4 of his beginners home for Shabbat dinner? Since Rabbi Buchwald insists on posing this question in front of the people directly involved, it makes it very difficult to say no. Fine, I'll take them. Introductions are made, and we begin to make our way home. Invariably, one of you will be screeching, wait, don't go on Broadway. That's the Goyish way. Go through Lincoln Towers with the flowers and the trees. That's the Shabbos way. Fine, Lincoln Towers. We get home, and again, one of you is screeching, stop, don't go into the elevator with the doorman. Take the stairs like Effie does it. I'm Effie. Effie lives on the 3rd floor. 10 flights later, we arrive home breathlessly. Introductions are made, and we take our places around the Shabbat table. You want to sing Shalom Aleichem each verse 3 times because it says so in the Siddur. Fine, Shalom Aleichem 3 times. Then you want Eishes Chayil read in English because it's more meaningful. Fine. Then one of you has a question. We just made Kiddush in Shul. Why are we making Kiddush a 2nd time? Well, to paraphrase Rini Light, how the hell do I know why we're making Kiddush a 2nd time? After Kiddush, one of you decides that you'd like to make your own Kiddush because you forgot to ask me before my Kiddush if I had you in mind. Fine. Make your own Kiddush at the rate of 3 Hebrew words a minute. Every line is a zinger here. Unbelievable. Then, after washing, we sit down, and during the course of conversation, usually mine, one of you will interrupt with undeniable sincerity and politeness and say, excuse me, Mr. Gross, but isn't what you're saying Lashon Hara? Yeah, I suppose you could say it's Lashon Hara. Fine. No more Lashon Hara. Then you want to sing Zmiros, the ones with 8 verses, all of them. Then you want to give Dvar Torahs. Every Dvar Torah you ever heard up there in the beginning service you want to do. Fine. Then you want a bench singing each verse because that's the way Effie does it. Fine, at this point, I bleary-eyed excuse myself, and again, with unfailing politeness, you say, thank you for having us. We'd love to come back next Shabbos. Oh, yeah, you'll be back next Shabbos, all right, over my dead. Oh. No, but you see, it's not that we dislike you, chas v'shalom, God forbid. It's that you make us uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable because after 20, 30, 40 years of saying Shema Yisrael, 3 times a day, when we're with you, we sense that perhaps our Shemona Esrei has become flat, routine, mechanical, while yours is vibrant and exuberant. We're uncomfortable because in the solitude of our souls, we ask ourselves, and don't believe for a second that we don't ask ourselves. We ask ourselves if we could do in our 20s and 30s and 40s what you've done. Could we uproot the habits of a lifetime, the occupations, change our jobs if necessary, confuse our friends, antagonize our families, just to commit ourselves to our Judaism? And if we articulate this question, few of us dare to answer it. And so I suppose in the last analysis, we're uncomfortable because you practice what we preach. By your enthusiasm, by your embrace of everything that's Jewish, you challenge us. By your insatiable thirst for knowledge, you provoke us. And by your open-hearted love affair with Judaism and everything about it, you ultimately shame us. We pray that under the inspired leadership of your rabbi, you'll continue to shame us, to provoke us, to challenge us, to lead us until the coming of the Redeemer Mashiach speedily in our days. What a great tribute. And what an impact it has to have the Baal Teshuva come to your house. So that's my message. My message is, it's been a great run. But now our priority really has to be our own children. And we can talk about some strategies